It's become received wisdom at this point that the history of Indian Hinduism and Indian Islam are hostile and irreconcilable. The firmest evidence that is supplied of this comes from uncompromising Persian language court chroniclers singing of the defeat of infidels in rising courts, like the Delhi Sultanate's court chroniclers in the 13th century. But as we look beyond into the regions that eventually became the Hindi heartland today, a more surprising picture emerges. Most medieval Hindus and Muslims didn't follow the hostile rhetoric of courts but inhabited a world of Awadhi Sufi epics with Hindu protagonists which paid homage to ancient Indian mythological tropes. For all their rivalries and arguments, the line between Indian religious strands wasn't as clear as we think, whether Buddhist and Brahmin or Sufi and Yogi. Medieval society was enormously diverse and extended far beyond the reach of courts and cities. Pastoralists, wandering traders and mystics, craftsmen, and agriculturalists made up the vast majority of the population. Dalma, which is today a town between the urban centers of Kanpur and Prayagraj, was once controlled by Ahir pastoralists before its conquest by the Delhi Sultanate. Late in the 14th century, as the Delhi Sultanate gave way to smaller regional sultanates, astonishing new Muslim texts appeared in the historical record, written by Indians converted by Sufi masters. One of these texts, which was perhaps one of the most important texts ever composed in North India, was called the Chandayan. It was written by Maulana Daud, an Ahir pastoralist turned Sufi saint. In the beginning of his new text, Daud wrote, and I quote, "I cast my sins into the Ganga. I became aware of the written word's power. I sang a Hindu ki song in Turki script, and by serving Sheikh Zayunuddin, evil is forever destroyed." End quote. These lines come from a painstakingly collected new volume of the Chandayan. According to the translator, who is philologist Richard Cohen, the lines above show that it originated in a cultural context we can think of as Hindu, above which Sufism had become a major strand of elite devotion. The Chandayan story follows two aristocratic lovers, Chanda and Lorik, whose illicit affair brings them into conflict with society and propels them into many adventures. As art historian Naman Ahuja points out in his erudite introduction to this volume, lovers' travails are a central theme of many of the great Sanskrit epics. Think Dushyanta and Shakuntala or Nala and Damayanti. The Chandayan's long, winding narrative was almost certainly borrowed from wandering Ahir bards, and it reflects popular tastes. Battles between dashing heroes, raunchy sex scenes, astrologers and prophecies. It has all the elements of great South Asian romances, cunning attendants, wronged wives, heroes disguised as mendicants, but it also has subtler Sufi ideas, requiring a master's explanation to understand. The hero Lorik is named after the sun, while the heroine Chanda is named after the moon. Her maid is named after Jupiter. So it's possible to read the text as a coming together of the sun and moon under the auspices of Jupiter. And though Lorik, the hero, fights many battles through the text, therefore increasingly selfless reasons, suggesting the soul's journey towards God. As Professor Ahuja writes, Sufis at the time attracted a wide following from communities with both Hindu and Muslim traditions. The Chandayan was intended to tell them a good story while also having more esoteric layers for those who took Sufi initiation. Many great Indian epics, the Hindu Ramayana and Mahabharata, the Jain Prabandha Chintamani, and Buddhist Jatakas, similarly had beginnings in popular legends. They also later received aesthetic and philosophical treatment by monks, poets, and Brahmins. So, from this perspective, by basing the Chandayan on popular ballads, Indian Sufis were very much following Indian Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain precedent. Just as Indian Hinduism had many strands, so did Indian Islam. Maulana Daud's Chandayan was popular among the Chishti order, which was popular in Delhi and Ajmer, but the Chishtis had limited political aspirations. Elsewhere, Sufi masters did have political aspirations, and they did not hesitate to use violence to get it. At the same time as the Chandayan was being composed in the Gangetic Plains, Kashmir saw the ascent of an uncompromising lineage of Iranian Sufis. These men were far less interested in local epics and concentrated their efforts on converting yogis and temples into Sufis and mosques, sometimes violently. But as we talked about in an earlier video, they presented their conversions as resulting from debates and magical competitions which proved the superiority of their tradition over others. At least rhetorically, this is similar to the tenor in which Buddhist and Brahmin debates were once conducted. After establishing their ascendance, Brahmin texts often presented Buddhists as misguided heretics incorporated into their superior tradition, which is exactly what Sufis also did to yogis. But other strands of Sufism engaged extensively with yogic tradition. In Refractions of Islam in India, historian Carl W. Ernst documents many examples of this, especially in Bengal and Punjab. In Bengal, for example, the tantric yogic view of the body was the basis for much Sufi literature, complete with chakras and the nectar of immortality. In tantric traditions, the body has 7 chakras, each associated with a god. Sufis identify the chakras with mystical stations, swapping out the gods for Muslim angels. Sufis and yogis really did have a lot in common. Both used breathing exercises and chanting for spiritual experiences, both refused to recognize caste distinctions, and both were buried instead of cremated. Wandering yogis stayed at Sufi dargahs, and both traditions exchanged not just ideas but also stories. In 1998, according to a report collected by Dr. Ernst, yogis at Gorakhpur claimed the Prophet Muhammad was a Nath yogi. Claiming another religion's founder as a member of one's own is quite a tradition in South Asia. Vishnu worshippers had claimed both the Buddha and the Jain guru Rishabha as avatars of their god. And in the 16th century, the Sufi master Muhammad Ghaut Gwaliari, in his Persian translation of an Arabic translation of a Sanskrit yogic text, claimed that Gorakhnath was the Islamic prophet Khizr. Gwaliari's text is remarkable in many other ways. At one point, he even calls on the tantric goddess Kamakhya, who we talked about here, to clarify a particular yogic posture. His work was composed in Gujarat and reached the Deccan, Mecca, North Africa, Turkey, and Indonesia. Indian Sufism, which itself was composed of many distinct traditions, was in turn a distinct, powerful body within the wider Muslim world. Its engagement with Sanskritic and popular traditions wasn't a one-off either. In The Many Lives of a Rajput Queen, historian Ramya Sreenivasan studied the Padmavat, a 16th century Sufi text that served as the basis for a 2018 Bollywood melodrama. The Padmavat was based on oral legends about the Delhi Sultan Alauddin Khilji. Though Bollywood depicted him as a half-mad barbarian, the Padmavat originally used Khilji as a metaphor for worldly illusion, while Rani Padmavati, the unobtainable target of his lust, symbolized wisdom. These kinds of misrepresentations of Indian Muslim history have become very common today. While India's liberal left has tended to paper over the violence with which Muslim kings maintained dominion, this romantic view of them has now been replaced with a far-right consensus that all Muslims were genocidal alien invaders, based on a handful of courtly texts usually written by bigoted immigrants. But regional language traditions reveal a vast Indian Muslim world that was securely rooted in Indian myth and tradition and engaged with popular traditions in the same way as Buddhists, Brahmins, and Jains once had. Like all Indian religions, Islam has squabbled and fought with others, and when they had the might of a royal court behind them, Indian Muslims could be as iniquitous as Indian Hindus or Indian Buddhists. But medieval rhetoric doesn't justify modern policy. It should instead remind us of our common inheritance as Indians, a diverse, rambunctious religious history with so many strands that there is plenty to feed the bigot and the open-minded alike. I'm sure this is a controversial opinion, so we'd love to hear your questions and comments. Follow us everywhere on social media. You can find me on Instagram at Anirudh and on Twitter at Kanisetti. We'll see you next week.